and sharing it with the Indiana CIO network, but realize since I'm recording anything you say, there is a chance that it'll get out to the masses if an Indiana CIO member forwards it. So just be careful about what you share. And the second thing is that this is not just an environment for us to share for 3 to 5 minutes about anything related to SharePoint intranet, but it's also an opportunity to improve our thinking. And so the recommendation, the phrase like, I have a suggestion or something of that nature, we really want to be open to the fact that if we put something out there and some people have ways to improve upon that, please be open to that. That's, I think, what's exciting about this particular format. If it goes well, we'll do similar things. And Julia, you just joined us. Do you mind just telling us where you work and what you do, please? She's on mute. So I'm going to go ahead and get the ball rolling. I'd like us to do hand raising throughout this call. And so I'll just watch for that to happen. And if you have a lot to share, try and do a couple bite-sized portions, knowing that if we have time on the back end, there'll be more opportunity for you to share then. So who would like to kick us off on a SharePoint topic that can also be a question, but it's ideally sharing best practices that you have in place? I was wondering who's going to want to go first, because I can pick on someone. I'm going to give it 10 seconds, and then I know who I'm going to grab first. All right, Rob, start us off, buddy.
So Ben, Grant's hand was up, just so that you know. I want to
I didn't
respect.
see it.
I want to
Thank you.
respect the volunteer.
Grant, is
So
your
I'm going to
hand up right
defer.
now?
Yeah, I took
that
it down.
opportunity to
I
Grant.
took it down.
Okay, can you put it back up to make sure I'm seeing it correctly?
Yep, I just am not a big hand raiser, so.
It's for some reason the first time it didn't pop up. It did this time. Grant, you have the floor.
Well, being a newbie, I just wanted to start off with a question. Going from traditional file environment on a file server that has 35 years worth of files on it into SharePoint, what with a user base that is change resistant, any thoughts, counsels as you're sharing about how you would do that process would be greatly appreciated.
Sherry, please.
I'm sorry, I can't find the raise your hand thing in Zoom, so it won't let me. But
you did
anyway.
a fine job.
Okay, the benefits of being on video, I guess. So yeah, the end user focus, I think, gets lost. And usually the IT department decides we're moving because they want to eliminate the file shares and the headache of the servers and the fact that people have things on their computers instead of somewhere where they're accessible and that type of thing. So I very much advocate for the end users that remember somebody, whatever you build, somebody has to use that. But also, I have been using SharePoint since before it was called SharePoint, and it's my baby. I can't believe my baby's almost 25. In March, she's turning 25 this year. So the being able to create an information architecture and well-planned architecture is going to be the key to making sure you don't just take the document dump that you had on those servers and computers and recreating that same thing. But also because of AI coming into the space, you've really got to make sure you've got a strong information architecture. Clean stuff up. Yeah, so I've done migrations. And they're like, I need everything. They've been there for 30 years. I need everything. Oh, really? You need that potluck sign-up list from 1993. You need that. Yeah, I need everything. So yeah, have them clean their stuff out.
Other comments on, you asked a very big question that I feel like we can run with in a number of directions. Carrie, please.
Sorry. Sherry, I have a question. When you're talking about having them clean their stuff out, and do those things, do you have or do you migrate things to an archive area? Let's say they reference things, but you need to keep it for a certain amount of time. Do you use that in a specific area of SharePoint too?
Yeah, I have a three-tiered philosophy. You have the authoring area, you have the publication area, and you have a retention area. So the authoring area typically happens in Microsoft Teams and OneDrive because that's where people are productive. You don't just share your Teams environments with whoever might need access. So the example I like to use, because my background is human resources, but but everybody can relate to, because they either work for a company or they are in HR. Let's say they have the employee manual. You don't let everybody see the working copy of the employee manual. That's going to be kind of OneDrive is that file cabinet that sits underneath your desk. SharePoint of the file cabinet is out in the hallway. So that's going to be in the file cabinet that everybody in the HR department has access to, which is the SharePoint site behind Teams. Once that is done, there are SharePoint communication sites, which becomes basically your intranet, and you publish that version into the intranet communication site for HR. And then eventually that HR department can be, that document needs to be replaced or updated, but you still need to keep it for legal reasons, which is why the information architecture is so important, because the determining how long you keep things, financial stuff has to be kept for 10 years or whatever those retention policies are, then that's a different SharePoint archive site where it's locked out from search. People can't find it, but it's something that needs to be kept for those documents that are part of the history of the organization or legally need to be kept. So I have a whole presentation on that. I think Robert threw his hat in the ring there too. This is a passion of mine, because I want people to love their tech, and I'm a Microsoft certified trainer for 20 years. And, I want, often people just build something, expect somebody's going to use it without asking them and giving them the tour. Like, this is our philosophy and why. And so it's maybe a longer answer than you were looking for, but yeah. Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
That was
Sure.
one of my questions that I was going to ask too, was where do you put things that you don't want to take over or that you just can't get them to let go of?
Yeah. But it can't be found, because otherwise now your AI is going to start looking at the garbage and returning garbage, and it's not garbage in, garbage out anymore. It's garbage in, garbage amplified. And we need to make sure that things are kept, in the right place, locked out, and not discoverable.
Heather, go ahead. Whoa.
One of the things that we ran into when we were migrating, dealing with the change resistant folks is you can still, one of the big things is like, people go to the Windows Explorer, that's where their files are. They want to continue to go there and access their files. They don't want to go necessarily to the website to look for a file. So any of the document libraries that you create can be synced to Windows Explorer, so they can have that same experience. There's an advantage to pushing people to the SharePoint sites, because it's bigger than just file management, but to make people feel good and safe doing being able to access things in a similar way. There's a group of people that they sync everything, and they go to Windows Explorer and they find their files and they like their folder structure and they can keep all that. And so that was important to a lot of my users. One thing that we ran into with the actual migration of data, is the file structures being too deep. They were too deep and they failed. And then you have to go in and pull files out and reorganize the architecture. And it was kind of a nightmare. So that is definitely something I would recommend before you even start, is to look at how people are saving their files. And if they're 8 files deep, folders deep, you have to rearrange it. You have to find a better way to store and organize the data. Um, we also tried in our main staff resources library, we did away with folders and we used metadata instead, trying to draw people to the site. And I've got a couple holdouts, people who hate it, and they keeps trying to add folders to that library. And that's something that I'm hoping this work group will address, because they only access it through Explorer, and the metadata doesn't go to Explorer. So it's that's the challenge that we're facing.
Sherry, can I just ask one question, because you might be able to pop in on this, is that as far as providing that Windows Explorer interface, I was under the impression that sync is becoming a deprecated technology versus the shortcut, and Robert's shaking his head. My question is, the shortcut to OneDrive, which offers similar but different functionality. We don't have to get into that right now, but it is a question I had. And Sherry, go ahead, and then I'll hit you, Robert.
The being able to add a shortcut to like a SharePoint library and into your OneDrive makes it very easily accessible. But people are still syncing those. So those are coming down, even though they don't live in their OneDrive. The content from that is still syncing to their computer, which they've got to be careful of, because their computer can only hold so much content. You don't have a 2 terabyte hard drive usually, but that syncing can be helpful, but you can lock down your SharePoint libraries that they are not allowed to create folders. I kind of use the analogy of the file cabinet. You have a cabinet, you have a hanging file, and then you have a manila folder, and you've never put a manila folder inside a manila folder inside a manila folder. So before we move or arrange things, I recommend, if this were a paper world, you wouldn't stuff folders inside of folders. You'd create another drawer, you'd have another hanging file. And that adheres to the 3-click rule for usability on the web. So they love their folders, and the migration I did, they had 32 deep folders, and that will eventually break, because that syncing and then being able to work with documents online and co-author with each other, if the file length, the URL for that file exceeds a certain number of characters, that breaks. So it's just a best practice to get out there and do a 3-tiered, hopefully no less, but go to metadata. I can look at somebody's file folders and tell them exactly what their metadata could be or should be, because they've already created those categories. They've already created that structure, and you just got to convert that to metadata instead of being part of that. And you can force them to put the metadata in, but you're right, with the syncing, it doesn't do that. And it'll go back and required things. You have nasty grams at the top of the SharePoint library.
Robert, please.
Yeah, I think there's the how do the users experience it, and then there's the tech underneath it. And so, as Sherry was saying, even when you're using a shortcut to OneDrive, which is the new preferred way for some really obscure technical reasons that only the folks at Microsoft care about, and then there's the way that we do sync. When I describe that difference to users, I'm really talking about the experience, particularly for those users who move between devices, right? Because if it's synchronized in your OneDrive, it'll come with you. If it's not, then you're trying to figure out how to set up all these syncs on all of these different sites. I will say we've slipped into a little bit of file management and organization and migration and stuff, and then you sort of had set us up to start talking about an intranet. That might be interesting to talk about how that's a little different than the file and collab that we've kind of landed in.
Which I'm ready to go there if you'd like to. I mean, I'm ready for you to go there if you'd like to, or someone can.
I'm happy. I mean, I think, and I flagged this in chat, right? So you have really 2 fundamentally different things, and this goes all the way back to SharePoint 2001. We kind of recognized there are 2 fundamentally different things, right? one side, there's what are you communicating with the rest of the organization? Not what they're working on together, not how you're interacting, but what's the information that you need to get to the rest of the organization? And an intranet is one of those mechanisms by which you can make that happen. And in today's world, if you're in the Microsoft space, you also need to consider how you will push that through Teams via Connect. The other side is the collaboration, right? And we've talked about some SharePoint sites and moving files. And one of the other things that we need to think about in today's world about collaboration is how does Teams play into that in terms of being the place through which people access the files? Still on SharePoint, but how do you kind of separate these two things in your head so that you can think about them separately because they are separate. They function separately. They do all that stuff. And I know Sherry kind of led into that just a bit earlier, but how do you think about these things as two different things? Grant, you started with this migration from file system, and I think that totally is devoid of the concept of an intranet and communication, right? It's all the files they need to do their job and to work on together and whatever that is. But there's no mechanism by which you make it easy for them to find things. And there, by the way, the first argument is going to be, yeah, but I already know where everything is today. Don't move my cheese, right? But how do you take the person who's new in the organization, right? We know that organizations turn over roughly 36% of their staff in a given year. Some are less, some are more, but the average across the industries is 36%. What do you do about the people who don't have the 10 years of experience and 20 years of experience or whatever? And that's what an intranet does. An intranet makes it easy for people to find all the things that the people who've been around for 20 years already know. I'm going to pause there.
I like what you're saying a lot. And we do just have Kate, you just shared an intranet blueprint, and I have some comments about it, but I feel like it'd be appropriate would you like to share what you just dropped in chat, that image?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I might have a bit of a different perspective than some of the other folks on the call. I'm not a technologist in practice. I studied art and design and have a strong focus in communication. My passion is organizational change management. And so while I lead our application, our business, and our training teams, I lead it from a place of more human-centered design. And so the internet has been a pain point since I started it at this organization 5.5 years ago. And I was fortunate enough to, when I stepped into the new role, to take on that project versus just complaining about it. And so last year in March, we went live with our revamped modern intranet site. And our approach was we're central IT for the 46 agencies and counties in the city. So every city agency and county agency would benefit from their own SharePoint site, but we don't have the capacity or resources. Prior to this year, we didn't have a full-time SharePoint admin. So we didn't have the capacity to scale the work. So our approach was, how do we use ourselves as a client and take our model and scale it? So we tried to think about the different use cases that we would have and the audiences and start with end user audience first, right? There's our internal staff, kind of like what Sherry was saying in terms of the levels. We took that in maybe a slightly different lens. We have our internal site where we're working. We have our teams where we're collaborating on projects. And then we have our hub, our communication site, which is the central site. And there's probably been a couple changes since that architecture. That was from about a year ago. But essentially, we started with permissions and access first, and then built the structure around that so it was made to fit, where we were choosing a team site. Previously, the default was just like, make a team site for everything. And it ended up with a lot of disorganized disjunction and siloing of information, and created a lot of noise. So the goal was to streamline our approach to be focused, and we've seen absolute massive traction. So we've scaled it already. OFM, just our Office of Finance Management, went live with their site, their version of this last week. HR just kicked off this week. And so because we made the development decisions we have a lot of that already done, so we can lean into the business decisions where they can kind of plug and play. The biggest gap, I know the ask was like wins, challenges. Our biggest gap is everybody wants the end result, but they're unaware or maybe not they're 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 not willing to commit the capacity to own it. And every agency or team that is going to have a footprint in an intranet has to have a product owner that is gets the vision from leadership and buys into it and supports it and like is going throughout the team. That's been the biggest challenge that we have seen to adoption. And that isn't, especially in a government sector, it's a slow ship to turn. It requires a lot of investment. And to me, an intranet is, I'm very passionate about it. It's very tied to culture. And very tied to how teams work. And so if you lose that culture team part, I think you miss the opportunities. The last thing I'll say is we've seen internal traction as well. We've leveraged a lot of this isn't just a site where we're putting stale information. It's not just like the new email that people ignore. We're using this, we're leveraging SharePoint lists for a lot of automated forms and processes and streamlining how we work so that we're able to clarify for the services we're providing how to access those services, how to then report on an internal way on where we're at with those services, what are the statuses, and how we are then delivering those in a more effective way. Because the biggest thing we get back from our the people we're providing is that they don't know how to work with us, they don't know what we provide, and they don't know when like the process ambiguity is like very difficult. And this SharePoint site, the main thrust for this was to clarify that for people, and so it's been a really good tool. So I probably said more than you were asking for, Ben, but hopefully that was.
That was an excellent answer. Sherry, do you have a follow-up to that?
Just that she's my sister from another mister, because I always say I'm the people side of change. Don't forget the people, and you just highlighted the fact that just because you build it, people won't use it, and if you don't build it to something that's usable for them, I have a blog series coming out starting next week. We're moving up to the 25. I'm doing 25 to 25 days of Microsoft SharePoint because of the birthday. I do it like a 12 days of Christmas thing at Christmas. So if you're interested and want to check it out, I'm happy to connect with y'all. But that's part of it. It's like, how do you build a house? How do you build your dream home? You don't just, build a house and expect people to move in. You got to know who's living there and what they're doing there. Yeah.
Kate, I'd like to speak to this, and this is where I really want to focus on like SharePoint intranet and have you poke holes in what I've where I am from an intranet maturity standpoint. And I want to speak to your particular diagram is that, again, a communication site as your homepage for the entire company. I feel like that is exactly the right usage of that. When I'm looking at the departments across a company, it seems to make the most sense that you're always building the teams, and the teams is driving the SharePoint. And when I look at your diagram, I kind of think about that having an actual page, whether it's on the hub that lists all the teams, is nice. Partially for people to go, oh, wait, that's a team I should be a part of. I didn't know it existed. But I know it's not that necessary, because when someone joins and they're put into the right teams, their first ability to know where everything is potentially through that actual team. And the thing that even when I have a one-person department, I like to have a team with the anticipation that it may grow, and also from a standardization standpoint. But I've been leveraging communication sites for the leaders of each department as a way that only they have access and the people that manage have access. And I've stayed very much away from private channels in teams as a way to restrict access to like the leaders. Can someone poke holes or elaborate on how I could do that better with my clients? Sherry, please.
Sorry, it's the DJ me. I can't stand dead air. But I also want to give other people a chance to say something if they want to. But Robert kind of talked about this, so let's go there, right? there are three types of SharePoint sites. There is a team site, which is tied to Microsoft Teams, and it's a collaboration site that sits underneath Teams. A lot of people don't realize that where they're storing stuff is actually in Teams. There is a standalone SharePoint site that doesn't have Teams, but thank you, Microsoft, for reusing terminology and confusing everybody. It's called a team site that is just for collaboration, but doesn't have the layer of Teams on it. And then you have the communication site. So on either end, you've got where you create things and where you publish things. That's the team sites like the newsroom, the communication sites like the newspaper where you publish things. But that one in the middle is one you can use for creating a storage and a workspace, maybe for just one person. And this is the theme or where content is being stored. And to your point, what if somebody else needs to come in there? You can always do what we call teamify that. So you can add teams to that later, even if it's just you. And so you store your stuff, you create that collaboration site, and then teamify it later if that becomes a need. Does that answer your question?
Oh, that's helpful. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Okay. I was going to put that in the chat while you're talking, but I was like, okay, I just said it, so I don't have to.
Go ahead, Kate.
I think what I heard, the only thing I would add is we struggled, and I think we're still evolving with our approach to this. I think our approach has been trying to again focus on who needs what. In our organization, we have a lot, like we have our ops team, we have our apps team, we have our security team, and there is a need for some of that information to be siloed, but I think historically too much of it has been siloed, and there's a result of misinformation. There's not enough sharing. And there's a fine balance between transparency and security. I get that. But what we've tried to do with our structure is leverage a team for anything that's private, right? So there's a security team, only the people in that team are on the security team and they're managing their documents in that team SharePoint. And then anything that is shared is on our communication site, which is it's not tied to a team, right? And we have a security folder for all of those things that are shared and collaborative. And so we've siloed the information that way, and then we put it all on one page because I don't know about you guys, but people have trouble navigating the document libraries in SharePoint. Like it's difficult, folder structure or not. And so we try to think about like when you go in and take a service from a business, right? You go to a web page and you access it and you guide the experience, right? So the page is meant to guide the experience of where to find things and how to do your job, essentially. And since the Intranet site has gone live, I've seen an active culture shift in people considering how to work better together. And the last thing I'll say is managing groups is a total pain, and especially I don't know about the turnover. So we've also worked with our network team to leverage dynamic groups based on fields and AD so that we don't have to on and offboard people into the different teams, right? So that's another way where we're building in permissions and access as a first requirement. Who needs to get access and where, and how are we making sure that when somebody starts, they're like, I didn't have access to one of our central SharePoint sites for 2.5 years when I started because nobody had documented it and nobody had told me, nobody had asked. And I was like, well, where do we keep all of our stuff? Right. So we're trying to get away from that so that it's more just a default of how we're managing our Azure groups. So that.
Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, I mean, I think so absolutely everything Kate just said, right? Like, so managing your access and doing all that. I think if I roll back into your comment, your question, I think we have to figure out the communication aspect and who needs to communicate how, right? And by the way, I posted a link to an article that has 27 communication channels that most organizations have. Where you have, and it's a subset, right? Like it's not a whole thing. It's literally a slide out of a deck, and then underneath that is criteria to select which channel. But to more directly to your question, is it the leader that needs to communicate? That's not always the case, right? And so I'll use a kind of quirky example, right? So imagine you're a school corporation, and you need to determine whether you are open or closed, or you have some impact to things that you only want to share internally, right? It's a little bit of a contrived example, but I want you to see it. So officially, the superintendent makes that decision. They decide whether it's closed, or open, right? So you might say, well, I'm going to make sure that the superintendent has the ability to communicate, blah, blah, blah. But if you talk to superintendents, they never make that decision. They ultimately approve the decision, but the decision is really made by the bus drivers, by the transportation management, because they're the ones managing safety. And so I say that to say that sometimes the people that you need to have communicating aren't necessarily the leaders. And we have to think about this from the point of view of how do people communicate. So Kate mentioned security team, right? So security team has an internal set of things, all the secret stuff that they do. Right? Secret squirrel stuff is what my son used to call it. And then they have the stuff which is they're communicating out to the rest of the organization about what are the latest phishing attacks, what you should be on the lookout for, what are the, and that should become a part of the overall stream of conversation with the organization. It should be just integrated into my experience of this organization is occasionally there's something relevant from security that I'm going to think about. So Ben, that's my focus. My focus is, so who needs to communicate? Who do they need to communicate to? What is that frequency? And what structures do I need to put in place to enable that to happen?
And I would assume that how you accomplish that is really having open dialogue with the leaders across the organization. Or expand on what I just said.
So I cheat. Honestly, I cheat. I go backwards. Who sends all the emails to the all distribution group that I want to absolutely have stopped? Those are the people that are trying to communicate. Some portion of those are appropriate, some portion are not. But I go back and I look at what are people doing today, and then how do I shape their behavior in the direction that I want to, right? And so I'll look at the all distribution list. I'll go find all the people that have sent to it, what the distribution of that is. I'll take the top third of people who have sent to the all distribution list. All of those are communicators. The bottom third, probably not. The middle third, I have to evaluate, right? I've got to figure out how do I enable these communicators, or do I put them behind a gate? So, and Kate, I'm inferring a bit from what you did. So if I get this wrong, just say something. Right, but there's a set of communicators that should have direct access to send a communication to the entire organization, to the entire city in that case. So those people know gate. There's the people below that have a low gate, right? They can do it, but it's pretty easy to get across the gate. And then there's people below that don't communicate frequently, and they want to talk about cakes in the break room or whatever, and those have a higher bar that is necessary for them to be able to communicate out to the entire organization. Not that they can't do it, it's just that they're going to go through an extra hoop or two. And so then when I stratify into rough thirds, and it's not always thirds, but often it is, then I can start to build three pathways that I then know what to do so that they can communicate and target where it's available. And I saw targeting was in there. So
Kate, I really like the comment you just shared that says, if the leaders don't strategically guide how an org will communicate, that's where I've seen challenges. It resonates with me because I've had lots of failures in during a lot of my technology career where I was the champion, I was the one driving change, and I didn't realize that that's very ineffective, particularly when I leave whatever initiative it was tends to collapse. It's got to be the leaders who are bought into this enough that they believe that this will help, and we're kind of guiding them on how to succeed. But it is so critical that they have that strategic buy-in. That's kind of your point, Kate.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I look back to when I started, I think it was during COVID, and we just had deployed teams to the enterprise, and it was deployed without it was turned on. And I remember at the time talking about like, well, maybe we should be guiding an architectural approach to thinking about the use cases and guiding like some governance around this, et cetera, et cetera. I think it was punted due to capacity, but it was also punted due to a vision, a very clear vision and the ability to execute on that, which was likely tied to capacity, right? But I think that the change between now and then is being able to paint the picture of where we're going and then getting it done, right? Like in reinforcing it. And that it wouldn't this is big enough that previously teams had tried to self-organize and like fill the gap of like, you know, we all acknowledge this isn't working. We're not getting direction from above, so we're just going to have to like figure out how to like cobble this together for ourselves. That's not unification. That's not transparency. It's not transformative in the way that they could be if we started at the top. And since that time, I've moved up in my position, and now I'm in the executive team, and I can be the change that I think was needed, right? So each team isn't left to fend for themselves and figure it out. It's painting the picture and bringing us all together. So just to put kind of a fun nuance, like in everybody, it's not due to a deficit for anyone at the time who was at the top. It's a matter of like priority and capacity, I think. You know, you can't do everything.
Yeah.
I see this as really foundational work, though. Without the investment, it's hard to do other things. And we end up spinning our wheels and burning so much time trying to align on how we're going to work that we're not as effective. So I would argue that this alignment and this, depending on how your teams work, is really important to being the most effective you can be.
I like that a lot. Just one of my clients that's using, well, they're using Copilot. No. I'm sorry. They're using ChatGPT business version, which can link into SharePoint. That it's specific to the user. That user, obviously, it's only the sites they can see. But they've also done something else, which they're a manufacturing company, and they use a system called Unipoint that contains all of their documentation pointers in a database, but the actual documentation lives on a file share on a server. And they've scripted to bring up all those files into a publicly accessible communications site library. And it means now with the SharePoint search function, as well as the Copilot or the ChatGPT functionality, they're taking advantage of content that it's almost like they're creating a pseudo data lake. But the point is that they now have a way to capitalize on the full text searching and ChatGPT opportunities of data that doesn't inherently stay and can't stay in SharePoint because of the limitations of the Unipoint software, but they're still getting all the benefits of that. Any comments or feedback on what I just shared? Okay. I'll throw out one.
I can comment on that one.
Go ahead, Robert. Oh, wait, Josh, please.
Yeah, I think that's if you need more impetus to move more SharePoint, I think that AI data ready issue is going to be key, right? Getting your data available in whether it's content or transactional data, I think getting that data out where SharePoint can use it so you can bring in your AI tools to ingest and do the things you want to do from a generative or an automated fashion, I think is going to be critical over the next couple of years with the controls and with the governance and with all of those things. But that's where we're trying to integrate our SharePoint. We're moving from an on-prem SharePoint to SharePoint Online. We're moving our data from on-prem and database stuff to Fabric. We're trying to integrate with other data repositories or document management systems, because if you can make it available via SharePoint using those tools, I think that is going to be the key to enable useful AI over the next couple of years. So not to come out too strongly, I think we're still figuring all of that out, right? But I think there's a huge advantage to SharePoint because it's a framework, right? It's a communication tool, but it can hold documents, which AI loves to consume, but it's also going to give you the ability to interact with databases, data lakes, and different features within that Microsoft ecosystem. So So yeah, we're heading down that journey. I don't know when we'll get there, but it's where we are.
Robert, back to you.
I think so. I think that the key is understanding that we need to enable search to get to the content. And whether that is you move it into SharePoint or you search enable another system or whatever, I think that's the key. And I say that, and it's really kind of focusing what you've been saying, both of you. The really sitting underneath Copilot, sitting underneath that functionality is search. It's using RAG, and it finds the top couple of relevant things. It feeds it to Copilot, says, "Hey, you might think this is useful," and then that's how it becomes magic. And so there was a mention briefly about a transactional system. Well, you don't move a transactional system's data into SharePoint. That the structured data into the unstructured system doesn't really work like that. But when you start to think about it from an AI, from a search enablement, then you can start to say, well, what are the data sources that have value to me, either via the chat interface, via the search interface? What are those data sources in our organization are the ones that matter? And then how do I enable them to be found via search or by proxy fed into RAG so that you get a better result out of Copilot. So it's not necessarily that you move all your content to SharePoint.
Go ahead, Sherry.
Yeah, just a quick. So my point wasn't to move it into SharePoint, but you're going to use APIs. You're going to use SharePoint. You're going to use React or SPFX, right? To leverage some of that, right? So you got content in there that AI can eat up and index and do a lot of stuff, to your point. But we need to pull some live data, right? And we can do that through the SharePoint as a front end to a lot of that stuff. So sorry, I didn't mean to confuse about bringing that data into transactional data into SharePoint.
And I just a fine point on that. It won't be usable with API and React and SPFX for Copilot. Because the way that pipeline works, the way that all works, it has to be in the search index and it has to be able to go fetch it directly. And so in that scenario, you might be looking at a custom connector, you might be looking at a search connector. There's a couple of different ways you can kind of go about it, build a skill, whatever. And I don't want to get lost in this point, but if you think about the LLM, the Copilot, right, it's got to make the query for RAG, it's got to get the content injected. And right now, the non-programmatic mechanism for doing that is search. That's the mechanism that they've wired in for us.
Sherry, go ahead.
And so just some context on the difference between search and AI. Search is you get content. When you use Copilot or AI, you get context. So I always go to real world analogies. I apologize, but that's how I think, because I think from the people side. But I just did a presentation at Ignite, and my explanation is it's like telling the teenager to go take out the trash. I fought with my son for years about taking out the trash because he would forget that, there's 4 trash cans, take them all out. And so I'd have to sit there and go, okay, here's my expectation. You have 4 trash cans, you have 4 trash bags. Every day you must remove all the trash from each of the trash cans. You have to give it instructions and tell it what the expectations are and speak to the person. And when you're asking for information, you have to speak who am I and who are they? So I have like 7 layers to the prompt that, talking about, and the whole thing was around how to take out the trash the right way. But that's the biggest difference. So when you are working with your search results, it may find the file name or maybe that term in the file name, but when the AI is going to go dig into the content of that. So you've got to make sure that your content is good. And now you've got agents on top of it that is like the mom, like me, hovering over them. Don't forget this, don't forget that. Well, and don't forget, here's another trash can that was something was laying on the floor. So just keep that in mind as you're going into that world or preparing for that world. And some of you are just now moving in. And it's so exciting for me and a opportunity like that to start from scratch, because Robert and I both have, and I'm sure Matt and your team have, job security, because we help people clean up that mess that they've made since they were lobbed over the fence in COVID. So, does that help at all? Hopefully, the difference between, okay.
I want to throw out a fun specific tidbit, and we've got about 2 more minutes. I do like to drive several icons into everybody's Microsoft Edge using whether it's Intune or a group policy that takes advantage of Microsoft Edge's ability to populate favorites. But having that link to the home page, having a link to the SharePoint site, and having a link to the technology training, I think are critical. And that technology training, again, one of the things as we do user adoption is most people don't know that SharePoint link that goes to the main SharePoint page searches not just titles of files, but it does index searching, and not only across SharePoint but all of their OneDrive as well. And that training as well, if I was to connect it to the chat that's just happening with Kate, is that these questions that we have about Copilot and what does it do and how does it do it, it's the thing that I see about SharePoint the most is that it's no longer appropriate to give someone a laptop and say, here you go, it's the company laptop, call the help desk with questions. 365 and the functionality of the different apps and what SharePoint does in OneDrive, there has to be some learning and handholding, I believe, in order to be successful. And if a company isn't committed to training new staff and ensuring they have basic skills, it's a failed implementation. Any final comments on that, or any parting comments that anyone would like to share? Go ahead, Kate. Oh, wait, 1 second.
Matt hasn't gone.
Yeah, Matt hasn't gone. Go ahead, Matt.
So we're obviously playing on a bit of a smaller scale with much smaller organizations here. But Grant, I want to go back to something that you mentioned right at the top of the call in your question, and that how do you get the people to adapt? And for us, it's been changing the conversation around SharePoint libraries, document libraries, to you no longer have a general finance file share, right, that contains everything for that department, and to instead think about project-based sites or project-based SharePoint libraries. So if you're working collaboratively on payroll, there might be just a payroll site that then, as others have spoken to, doesn't have so many layers underneath it and multiple different levels of directories. It's reframing that conversation as to how they interpret how files are stored and shared with the people that they need to access.
Wonderful. Everybody, we are at the end of the hour. I'll send out another survey to see if we want to continue in conversation around something like this, but it's really going to be an open-ended survey to find out what other topics do you think would be good for us to have this type of format. Always happy to pass the baton to someone else who would like to moderate the meeting. That's exciting for me, but I really appreciate the participation. I can't tell you how much I just learned in the last 60 minutes. This is what I love about Indiana CIO. So everyone, thanks for sharing. And Grant, great starting question to really get us going today. So thank you all. Have a wonderful weekend. I appreciate you all.
Thanks,